Okay, we are happy to be joined today by Ian Greengross, who comes on, and Ian's got one of the more interesting bios, I think, of people. I mean, we have a lot of interesting people on the show, but one of the more unique bios. I think we've had coaches, we've had players on here before. So Ian comes in. Ian's an agent, but just Ian's a NFL player's agent, a hockey coach's agent, a data scientist agent, and so Ian, thanks for joining us.
No, it's my pleasure.
So I want to start right away. How does one get into being an NFL player's agent and an NHL hockey coach and a hockey coach's agent? How to give me kind of the backstory of how this happens for you?
All right. So the shortest version, so I don't take up the full time of the podcast, is I was like the fifth string goalie at Boston University, like 88, 89, 90, 91, somewhere in that range. And, I knew that professional hockey was not in my future. So I went to law school instead. And when I was in law school, I actually worked for a hockey agent, a guy named Buddy Myers. And Buddy had been around since the 70s, representing some players. And right about that same time I started working for him, about a year and a half in, the Chicago Wolves were going to be awarded as an expansion franchise in the IHL. And so he was part of the group that put in the ownership bid to become the owners, and they won. And you can't own a team and represent players, even if it's a minor league team, in that same sport. So he had to get out of the business. And I was also taking sports law in law school at that time. And fortunately, I'm a lot better at math than I am at hockey. And so the salary cap had just come to the NFL, and my sports law professor had done some legal work for a very big football agent here in Chicago, a guy named Steve Zucker. He represented Jim McMahon and like 10 of the Bears when they won the Super Bowl. And since the salary cap had just come to the NFL, he was looking for someone to help him with that math side of stuff and really get into the nitty-gritty of the salary cap. And I had done some arbitration briefs for Buddy when I was working with him using my math skills. And so based on Buddy's recommendation and on my sports law professor's recommendation, they got me an interview with Steve. We hit it off because he was also a big hockey fan. So I started working for him. I brought over my 3 clients in the East Coast League and my 2 clients in the IHL. But, back then, the guy supporting me now is a hot football agent. So after about 2 years, I, was mostly a football agent. And so, I've done that. And I also have football coaches as well. And, I've been doing that for a long time, since about 1995. And then if you fast forward, so this is part of the story, to the summer of 2014, one of my old teammates from an elite men's league team, guys who played in college or, high level of juniors or, guys who played at a high enough level. We were on a men's league team for a while and, we lost our sponsor and guys go their different ways. But he had become a skill and development coach for the Blackhawks, a guy named Kevin Delaney. And since, I can pretty much set my schedule because my clients are all around the country, as long as I have my phone with me, I'm pretty much in my office. I still play hockey a couple days a week to get my exercise. And, there's always skates in the middle of the day and so on. And so I was going over to the rink where the Hawks used to practice before they built their own rink, which is where I would have my usual skates. And Kevin was getting off the ice in the summer of 2014 with Brandon Saad and Andrew Shaw and, a few of the other guys. And it was kind of, late July before they were going to start their captain's practices at the end of August. And he didn't have a goalie. And I said, look, I'm glad to come out. I have a modicum of skill. I'll maybe stop maybe 30% of the shots. But, I'm not going to hound these guys for autographs. I have plenty of famous clients. I know what it's like to be around professional athletes. I'm not going to ask them for a stick or an autograph. If you need me, it's great to play with the best players in the world. And so, he's like, all right, well, let me talk to the guys about it. And I said, great, let me know. And so the next day he texts me, he's like, be here the day after that. And so I started, coming to these summer skates with, but around then there's only about 10 guys in town at the end of July. But then as August rolls around, more guys come. And that year their 3 signed goalies were Scott Darling, Corey Crawford and Antti Ranta. Well, Corey stays home in Montreal until the day before training camp. Antti stays over across the sea, until the day before training camp. So as captain's practices rolled around, they invited me to continue to stay. And so I went to practice, captain's practices 5 days a week for the 3 weeks leading up till training camp until Corey and Antti showed up and they're like, yeah, we don't need you anymore. Politely though. And so, during that 14-15 season was their last cup run. Patrick Sharp got hurt during their 2-week road trip where they used to leave for both the circus and the Disney Ice Show. So they had two-week road trips. So while he was hurt, it was me and Sharpie at the rink while the team was away in November over Thanksgiving and so on. And then Patrick Kane had gotten hurt, and he was coming back during their second road trip. So it was me and Patrick Kane, at the rink as well when he was kind of coming back and the team was on the road. So I was kind of well integrated. And then finally, they started making the final cup run at the end of the season in 2015. And by then, Darling was getting more play time than Ante was. And so when they called up the Black Aces, they didn't want Ante to, have the indignity of being a Black Ace. He was an NHL level goalie. He didn't need to be practicing with the Black Aces. So I went to practice every day as a Black Ace during the conference finals and Stanley Cup when they won in 2015. And, good luck charms, how superstitious hockey players are with more equipment, left skate, left pad, right pad. So I kind of stuck around for a few summers. And part of doing that, I always found a way to try and thank Kevin, because without Kevin Delaney, I would never have been a part of it. And as part of thanking him, I know this is a long story, but as part of thanking him, one summer, in like the summer of 2018, I read in Sports Illustrated about the BioSteel camp. And I said to Kevin, I'm like, well, wait a minute. We have the BioSteel camp. Kaner had started hanging around in Chicago in the summers to be with, his then, girl, fiance / now wife and mother of his child. And so he was around and Taves would come in and, they were trying to, 2018, they hadn't made it past the first round in a while. So guys were sticking around a little more. And so Scott Darling and I, goalie to goalie, had become friends. And so I said to Darls, who should run the goalies, at a professional level if we're going to have this like BioSteel level camp? And so he named a guy named Mike Valley. And so for those that don't know, Val's was a goalie coach in the league for about 8 or 9 years, a couple years with Nashville and about 6 or 7 years with Dallas. And Val's had moved away from that because he's just a brilliant guy. He comes up with all these great business ideas. He gets them running, sells them off, and is on to the next one. And he's like, why am I killing myself on the road when I could spend more time with my family with all these great ideas I have? But to stay connected to hockey, he would still run a summer camp up at Wisconsin where he played in college. And so Darls recommended Val's to run our goalie end of our Chicago version of the BioSteel camp. And so I started to get to know Val's through that. And, as we were getting to know each other, he's like, well, wait a minute. You're in the locker room every day with all these guys and, you're not representing any of them. And I said, look, if one of them comes to me, that's great. But they all know what I do. I've gotten some of them paid tweets because, football players tend to get a lot more attention than hockey players do, at least here in the U.S. And so I said, look, if one of them comes to me and says, Ian, I've come to know you. I trust you. I want to make a switch for my guy. Would you ever think about doing it? Absolutely. But I'm not going to violate the sanctity of the locker room. They're letting a mid-40-year-old guy practice with them every summer and basically be part of a Stanley Cup team. I mean, that much of a Stanley Cup team. But, nonetheless, I'm not going to actively, encourage them to switch from their guys or do whatever. So, and he said, what, that makes sense. And he said, but, I'm still in touch with a bunch of players. Would you want to do it? And I said, of course. I said, but, know this. The moment you're known as the guy who's starting to refer me guys, people are going to look at you different. And I don't want you to lose what you have with your connection with the players because I think that's important to you. And he's like, you know what? Let me think about it. And then it came back to me. And so this kind of relates to the coaches and how we're all here today. Is he said, there's only about 3 or 4 guys really helping coaches, and it's such a different world. He said, in football, since you can represent your players when they go into coaching, of course, that's the most natural thing. They call you. But, I had a 15-year relationship with my agent when I went into coaching. In hockey, NHLPA certified agents are not allowed to represent coaches. So there's only 3 or 4 guys doing it. It was a whole new world. I went agentless, and so many of my coaching friends are agentless. It's not like we're stealing clients. I can just go to them and say, hey, now we're a part of this, and I'm not going to lose friends over it, kind of like, again, where if I was pushing players to you, I might lose that angle. This is not something I would lose an angle on. And so that, started the whole hockey coach representation business. And he said, we should bring in one more person, a guy named Frank Provenzano. He was an assistant GM in the league for 14 years. He knows a lot of people and he knows how the team side works. And so the 3 of us have now been representing hockey coaches for about the past 4 to 5 years. So I'll pause and take a breath. So data scientists. So I said I'm a lot better at math than I am at hockey. I've always been a big computer nerd. Even though I was an athlete, I was still also very much a computer nerd. And, I had an Apple IIe in the mid 1980s. I learned BASIC. I wrote a game in BASIC. It's too embarrassing to mention what I wrote. But, I learned other languages like Pascal, and then they made me learn COBOL in college and so on and so forth. And so, I always kind of had those abilities. And, I kind of kept them up a little bit, certainly working with math and stuff, but not so much programming. And so, right about the same time this whole coaches thing started, not coincident to that, just in terms of timing wise, I also know that, sports are much, are relying much more on analytics and data than they ever have been. And, I have some of that capability both in the math sense and in the computer sense. So I started learning Python through a local Chicago users group. And, that kind of led me, to know Python at least enough to be dangerous when it comes to analytics, right? I'm not going to write a game in Python or, stuff like that, but I know enough to be dangerous. And, my final project for the mentorship program that they have was using Python to predict running back salaries, and certainly, as probably most people who are good enough at it would figure out, the methodology of KNN was the best methodology because realistically, if you think about it, so KNN is a number K of a number of features or variables matching to their nearest neighbors. So essentially the distance between a plot on a chart between those variables and the nearest neighbor. And so if you think about it, that's what I've done in my head for the 25 years before I learned Python, right? You have a running back or you have a goalie and you take their statistics and you figure out which goalies or running backs are most closely related in terms of their statistics, in terms of their, I'm not going to say Euclidean distance because who thought of it that way, right? In their head, but in terms of how far their statistics are off of each other. So, again, I became dangerous enough to use Python in my work. And so that led to me, having conversations on Twitter about analytics as it mostly related to football. And there was a reporter for The Athletic, Ethan Douglas. And so Ethan covered the Chiefs and I had Damian Williams, who scored a couple touchdowns in the Super Bowl for the Chiefs. And so we got to know each other over Twitter. And about 3 years ago, he asked me to join him in submitting for OTT Hack, the hockey analytics conference. We did a paper for it, and I said, just remember, you're like this with data science, and I'm probably here, right? So I'm like a 5. I can understand and contribute, but like if you want forests and trees and XG boost and all that stuff, you need to do that yourself. I can contribute the hockey knowledge, certainly, but so he added 2 other people. I know this is such a long story. He added 2 other people, Sean Clement, who had done some consulting for NFL teams, and Nick Wan, who works for the Cincinnati Reds. And so the 4 of us wrote a paper together. And so I contributed a 10 in hockey knowledge and like a 4 in data science. And they were 3 10s in data science and good enough. So we actually won honorable mention, yay. But Nick, I had known about Nick, funny enough, because he does that stream where he teaches Python on Twitch. So I'm like, oh, I get to meet Nick. So this was all great. And so, of course, you become fast friends with anyone you're writing a, submission paper for. And so, about 3 or 4 months later, Nick came to me and said, can you help me, and be my agent? So as you know, Nick has that Twitch stream and he gets sponsors. And so he had a, hardware manufacturer come to him and say, we want to do an ad buy, and have you use our stuff and mention our stuff and so on. And so he said, can you look this over? And I said, of course. And so he sends it to me and I'm like, well, wait, they're giving you like 1 computer? And he said, yeah, well, retail. And I said, yeah, retail is this, but for them, it cost them like 98 cents. I mean, do you need more? Do you need a new monitor? And he's like, well, I could use it. And I'm like, great. So we'll ask for this, 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 and this. He's like, you're sure? And I'm like, I'm sure. So I type out an email, he copies and pastes it, he sends it to him, calls me back like 2 days later. I'm like, am I fired? He said, no, they agreed to everything. I said, exactly. And so he's like, great, thank you, and so on. So then like another 3 months after that, he calls me up and he says, all right, another crazy idea. There's a whole community of YouTubers who make these data science videos, how to learn Python. And instead of going to college, you watch like 20 YouTube videos and now you're a Python programmer. And I'm like, oh, Okay. And just like Nick, they get offers for sponsorships as well. They're thinking about kind of forming a collective where like 30 of them are under one roof and just making life easier. One-stop shopping for, say, HP or Dell or whomever is going to come to them. And that way they can say, well, we've got people who are popular on LinkedIn, people who are popular on Twitter, people who are popular on YouTube, and so on. And they need someone to kind of be lawyer, agent, and so on. Does this interest you? And I said, well, of course it does. And so that's how I now represent data scientists as well. So now I've talked for 13 minutes. It's someone else's turn.
No, it's fascinating to hear the backstory because there really is nothing like this. Nobody really like this, to a certain degree. And one of the things that I really wanted to highlight just with your background is how much, you and Frank and Mike are sort of changing the game when it comes to kind of representation in the NHL. Because, going back, there's a really nice Scott Burnside story from a few years ago that I remember reading, that talked about, how you guys have stepped in and really filled a void that previously hockey coaches and hockey personnel hadn't really ever looked for representation or asked for representation as it pertained to, negotiations. And so I wanted to get your take on kind of what made you want to actually be part of this group that changed the game here in hockey. And then, now give us the 5-year update. I think that story was 2019. And it was talking about maybe 50% of coaches had representation. Do you have a sense kind of where we're at now and if things are continuing to still move in that direction?
Yeah. So first, in terms of wanting to do it, first of all, it got me back connected to hockey. So that first year that Mike suggested it, I went to the draft because the NHL Coaches Association, which does a great job, holds an annual coaches meeting, and it's actually an educational meeting more and a meet and greet that really helps out a lot of the coaches who aren't yet, made it to the big time. And that's, look, coaching high school or coaching wherever is still a big responsibility. So I'm not saying that, but, people want to either get to the NHL or other parts. And so, I went to that, and funny enough, I walk up the stairs because, I'm new there. Like, I'm kind of the outsider. I'm an agent. As an agent, you always know you're just a little bit of an outsider no matter what. And so I wanted to wait to make sure to everybody had checked in. I didn't want people to think I was all just coming there to just meet everybody and hand out my card to the entire world. And so sure enough, everyone's in the big meeting room to start the day with the announcements and the schedule and the whole thing. And I come up the stairs and there's one person who's basically at the top of the stairway leading to this, to what, you've got the 6 doors that open to the main ballroom right at the top of the stairway. Who's standing there? David Quinn, right? A BU guy, which is, and so I walk up the stairs and Quinny's finishing up a phone call and he looks at me. He's like, Ian? And I said, Quinny. And he said, what are you doing here? Last I heard you're a football agent. I'm like, well, funny story. And so, Jay Pandolfo was there. So many, and it was and Joe Sacco, and I represent none of them, but, it was like old home week, though. It wasn't as though I hadn't last seen them in 1994. It was as though I had seen them last week. And so, it kept me. So in terms of doing that, that was kind of just the personal impetus. In terms of the business side, look, to steal a line from Moneyball and to change it a little bit, a contract says to a coach the same thing it says to a player, that you're worth it. And since I had already been representing coaches in football, and I know, look, you should always have someone as a buffer, right? These conversations can sometimes be a little tough, especially when a coach or a player has a certain determination of their value. Teams are never unfair in that sense of the word, because a team's job is to get my player to sign for the least amount of money they think he will accept. If that's $1.98, good for them. If they think my guy will accept that, good for them. I'm never mad. Never mad. Now, my player might get mad, but I'm never mad, right? Because I have the exact opposite job. My job is to convince the team to pay my player as much as they would absolutely pay before they can absolutely say there's just no way, right? And somewhere, if both sides are kind of doing their jobs and doing it reasonably, we'll have good conversations. We might not always agree, but as long as there's a point to it. Now, if their point is, well, your guy, we just don't care, and if he signs it, then we're not really getting anywhere. If my guy's like, look, if they want to pay double what I'm worth to stay because I don't like so-and-so, fine. But if we're really trying to get somewhere, then 99 times out of 100 even, those are pleasant conversations that have a point, and I'm never mad. I'm like, okay, if that's what you really think, then fine. And I'll take that and distill that information to my client. I'm not going to sugarcoat it too much because they need to know what's going on, but some of the things a team can say to me and vice versa, I can say to a team, you may not want to, to say directly to, your boss. And so that was kind of my business side impetus was, look, I've been doing this for coaches long enough on the football side. I can bring it to hockey. It gets me connected back to hockey. And, it's been fairly well received. There have been some, referencing that Burnside article, our first couple negotiations were with Doug Armstrong. I mean, Doug is a wonderful person, but I mean, he's not exactly, in terms of giving money away, it's not, and Ryan Miller assists him. So credit to Ryan Miller as well. They've not been known exactly for like, oh, here, we'll just give you $10 million to be the goalie coach, right? I mean, they're known as tough negotiators, and they were perfectly pleasant. We worked out the deal, and things were great. So, and again, I think it helps as well because then my guy's doing what he's doing, and we have an idea of what we want, of course, but he can go and focus, and the negotiations will get done.
For people who don't know, real quick, it's the other Ryan Miller, and I love that. That's what Ryan's Twitter handle is.
Yes,
it's great when the Blues in that short time when they did trade for the goalie Ryan Miller, they had two Ryan Millers there. So that's for anyone who didn't know that part, that there's a second Ryan Miller with a pretty big role in the hockey world, as if you may not know, in St. Louis there. It is a great time to talk to you about all this stuff because it is an incredibly busy time for someone who has decided to step into the coaches, the world where you have. And I know we see a lot about the coaching changes. The fact that we have 19 teams have changed coaches in the last, now is it 18 months or whatever. We have Marty St. Louis is the fifth most tenured coach at his current role, and it's amazing to think of that because I remember hearing the story just 24 months ago when he got hired, talking to someone who said, well, I know someone who lives in the same neighborhood as Vermont as Marty, and he was literally running down the street the other day, like on his daily jog, and now he's coaching the Montreal Canadiens. So ton of coaching turnover has been happening lately. NHL coaches have just been flipped over. There's been a select few, obviously, that have had long tenure, and those are ones that have typically won some Stanley Cups. As you look at the coaching world and the market where this all is, what do you kind of attest to the reason that this is such a common thing now for the coaching lifespan of an NHL head coach to be so quick and so easily flipped?
So as Prashanth mentioned, the article by Ryan Clark, from just like 8 weeks ago was very, very prescient, I guess. So, and not to repeat too much of it, but again, different format here. So, it's a lot here. I'll start with this. Long before my dad ever knew I'd be going to sports and be a sports agent, when I was a kid watching sports with my dad, he had to say it's a lot easier to fire the coach than it is the players, right? So certainly there's that, right? And then on top of that, why is it so much in hockey versus anything else? Is, the relative revenues. And even though hockey doesn't bring in the same amount of revenue as NFL, pretty much every owner is a billionaire, right? And so, they didn't become billionaires by giving away their money. And when you fire a coach, coaches have fully guaranteed contracts. Well, it's one thing to fire a coach in hockey who's, say, making $2 million for 2 more years is $4 million. It's a lot of money in the world. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. That is real money. But it's a lot easier to digest than firing an NFL coach at $8 million for 2 years and $16 million just to sit at home. So, and NFL coaches get a little longer contracts as well. So again, you might be paying for 3 years for a guy to sit at home at $8 million. That's $24 million. Lot different to pay out of your pocket $24 million than $4 million, even if you are a billionaire. And so, there's that life cycle there in terms of hockey, that the coach's life cycle is short to begin with because they're not getting as long of contracts, much less the fact of how much they're getting paid. It's a lot easier to fire them. So you mix that in where, again, can't fire all the players. What else can I change? Can change the coach. And so that perfect storm in hockey, kind of lends itself to coaches getting turnover. And look, I don't want to minimize the value of coaches. I represent enough of them. We all know hockey. Look, you certainly can't diagram up a play short of maybe setting up your power play and your penalty kill, because those are fairly static, right? But, hockey is more free flowing, unlike NFL, where, people believe a coach has much more influence because, as we know, each play is a discrete unit that is set up at the beginning of the play. Basketball, somewhat the same thing, right? There's true possession in basketball. You can run systems and plays and so on. And in baseball, we know the quants have taken over in baseball, and, the manager just says, oh, I look at the chart, time to pull this pitcher, time to set this guy over here. But nonetheless, so some of that plays into the myth of, well, if it's easier for me to change the coach as well because we're not as system dependent and so on. But again, I mean, and this is something that I've talked to my coaches at all levels, right? If you have a bunch of players who are strawberry, right? And their best strengths are strawberry, and your preferred system is chocolate, and you try and impose a chocolate system on a bunch of strawberry players, you're going to have a problem. So there is coaching involved. You have two choices. You can either coach them up to be chocolate players, or you can modify your system. So, a coach doesn't just show up and say, well, here we go in hockey, even though it is more free flowing, there are things to do. And, you take a look at, so you wanted me to mention some of my clients and where I am 5 years later. So Donnie Granato, right? And, we could go into the reasons why he's no longer there, but let's take at some of the stuff that he did do, right? Players developed under him. That wasn't magic. I mean, Donnie had a 20-year history of working at the developmental level. Clearly, some of that came into effect. Now, whether, the reasons for a regression this past year, and we can talk about all those things, whether it's Donnie or not, but nonetheless, coaches do have influence. And as Donnie says, look, I had to coach him up to get to my system, and then when we get there, we can do things. Now, whether they made it or not, that's private conversations. Not going to delve into all those. But there are things that hockey coaches do that I think are underappreciated. Now, if you ask Yolo Pinato on Twitter, he thinks I could probably coach an NHL team and it wouldn't make any difference.
So, along those lines, one of the follow-ups I always have is what you sort of highlighted, in that there are differences between what is easily interpreted as the impact of a coach between sports. So without necessarily giving away anything propriety or, going too deep into your analysis, how do you justify the value of an NHL coach or a front office personnel or business ops in these types of negotiations?
Well, all right. So first of all, I'm never going to, there's information asymmetry all around, right? Which is why people have agents. And so the biggest information asymmetry is a team re-signing their own, right? Because literally the GM sees the coach every day. He knows the systems every day, or a team sees its player in practice every day. They know the plays that are called every time he has an assignment. So, there's always going to be information asymmetry. So, of course, when it comes to coaches, wins and losses, right? I mean, number one is wins and losses. But, there are certain things like, again, thanks to advanced analytics, right? And so you can say, well, look, we're giving up less high danger chances under Donnie's system, or, we're giving up, we're creating more scoring under Donnie's system, or these players have come along. There are some objective metrics. Or if I have a goalie coach, did someone develop, or is their game staying steady or so on? You try and look at some of the metrics that are measured for the players that they work with in order to say how the coach has done. But look, at the end of the day, a head coach is going to be measured on wins and losses, period, end of discussion, right? So either I'm doing an extension, in which case they came to me and said, look, we value what your guy has done, and so we're going to extend them. And, then it's about what the marketplace would be. You're always trying to figure out, look, at the end of the day, an extension really says, we don't want you to go to the marketplace. We want you to be here, and we're willing to give that to you now so you don't have to worry about anything further happening before you get to the marketplace. In the case of a player, that's injury. In the case of a coach, that's, going 0-20 in the last 20 games of the season, right? And so what you're trying to say is, okay, what is the marketplace, right? Now, would it be more this year? So we need to increase up, and then the team's like, okay, but for the security, we need to ratchet back down. And again, if you're doing these things correctly, I'm going to pick out my 5 comparables, right? And the team's going to pick out their 5. And if we're here, if we're here, it's going to be a problem, right? Now, if we're here, we can say, all right, the team for hockey, the team's going to be like, throw out the New York Islanders because, they're paying extra for having to live in New York. And I'm like, fine. And then I'll say, well, throw out the Arizona Coyotes because, well, And so, and then we'll narrow it down, and hopefully within this range where we mesh, we then begin to have a range. Now, clearly I want the top end of that range even where we mesh, and the team wants the low end of the range, and that's where it kind of gets into the art of it, right? How can I prove to them that my client deserves the top end of the range versus them saying, well, he's still in the range. It may be the bottom end, but it is the range where we're, meshing. And so that comes into the art. And look, there's a give and take. And again, it's how willing is each side to wait to see, okay, am I really going to stay here and get this deal done versus hitting the marketplace? And with a player, again, it's a little more because you don't want to miss out on the gold rush of free agency, right? With a coach, you don't know for sure what jobs are going to be open at the end of the season. So with a coach, it's more likely to get done than not, unless, again, you're so far apart on that scale that you just have nothing to talk about. But with a player, yeah, that's a lot of the time when you see players reach free agency. It's not that they didn't try. But, again, with money going back up, especially in hockey, now that the COVID money's been recovered and so on, and again, I know less about the player side, so I don't want to overstep my knowledge area. But, now that the COVID money's been recovered and the cap's going up, you may have a much different opinion as an agent for a player of where you're going to be, and you don't want to be under the market. So,
kind of on that ideology right now, like in this space where we're going to see, like I think the list right now is there's 7 or 8 teams right now without coaches or in the NHL, right? Is this the type of spot where when there's that many jobs opening, does that make it more of a buyer's market or a seller's market for the coaches that are negotiating? Like if you like it's in it with that many jobs opening, it's not like, oh, well, there's only one of these. No, there's 8 others, right? So,
well, if you're Craig Berube, right, you have leverage. I mean, here, look, part of the reason Mike wanted so badly to start helping coaches is over the years, some of this, hockey mentality was a coach got an offer, they said thank you, and that was the end of it, right? They didn't even think to negotiate for themselves, much less have someone for that, because it was, well, I'm thankful to even have a job. Coaches are made, to use a big $9 college word, fungible. They're made to feel fungible. Right? Because if you don't want this job, we'll just go offer it to the next coach and, he'll take it. And that's not really true in 2 scenarios. And in both hiring scenarios, whether you're new to the team or an extension, right? Even if you're new to the team, they've picked you, right? There's a reason they picked you over the other 10 candidates that they would offer it to if you don't come to an agreement. So there isn't what I say an institutional cost for not getting you. It's not the same institutional cost as replacing you, which we'll get to in a minute, but there is an institutional cost for saying, all right, we've done all these interviews, we've gone through this thorough process, you're the guy. Now, again, if we're too far apart, if we're asking for $6 million and teams offering $3 million, it's not going to get done, right? But there's always some level for them. Now, they might say, look, 3 is what we've got. It doesn't matter, if you're Scotty Bowman or you're, Sean Shapiro just moved into coaching, right? $3 million is $3 million is $3 million. It's what we've got. It's what we're going to pay. I'm not lying to, because, I'll eventually find out in the end what that guy got. And if they did lie to me, that's a problem, right? And so, now there's more of an institutional cost, obviously, if we're talking about an extension and someone leaving, a la Rod Brindamore, right? And I don't represent Rod, but if Rod leaves, that's a huge institutional cost to them. Given their success, now obviously they haven't made it out of the second round, but nonetheless, I would tend to say that Rod is a coach worth keeping, and if he's not, he's going to be snapped up elsewhere. So not only are you not going to have Rod, he's going to wind up competing against you. So there's a huge institutional cost about not getting Rod. So when you talk about leverage now in terms of the marketplace, sure, if I have a coach who's hot and 3 teams want him, I've got leverage. But to go back to what I was talking about 2 minutes ago, if a team thinks my guy only has that offer, which more often than not is true, I'm not saying I don't have leverage, but I only have the leverage of you chose him. Let's get it done. And again, I can't say, well, I've got, such so-and-so offering 6. You don't want to give me 3? Fine, I'll take 6. And they'll see that I took 6. And, again, I can't bluff that and say I've got someone else offering me 6 if I don't have it, because when they don't give me 6 and I don't get 6 from someone else, I've lied to them. And that's, bad for our future relationship for all my clients. Now, that's not to say we don't push the envelope to negotiate, but you have to know where your leverage margins are, or you're going to have a big problem at the end. And so when you talk about all these jobs being open, sure, if you have a client who's getting more than one look-see, you will have some leverage. So even if there's 2 jobs open, if your client is interviewing for 2, you have the leverage. But with 8, it hopefully opens, or 6 or 5 or more than 2, it opens up windows of possibility for leverage. But at the end of the day, the hockey community is very small. They're going to know if your guy's in the mix for a final 2 or final 3 interview somewhere else, and they need to snap them up and give you that extra $100,000 that you're pushing for at the very end or not.
I do wonder too, we talked a lot about guys who are looking at NHL jobs. I'm curious too right now in your view of how because the NHL coach is not a very stable job by nature, right? Like it's the lifespan of an NHL coach it is not a stable job. It is a 2.5 year job, right? That's what it feels like for most people. That's kind of the average, right? As you know, in football, what's the average NFL career now? Like really 2.5 years or something.
It's 3.5 now. Because,
yeah.
Well, so, I mean, you talk about some good things from analytics, although running backs, my favorite position, have suffered. Nonetheless, we all know that there's value in holding on to your young players under cheap rookie contracts, as there are pretty much in every sport. So it's come up. But go ahead. You were going to make another point, though.
Yeah, but so we've seen one of the things that's been really interesting to me, and we see some names in it, and I've seen because the contracts have been public for college hockey coaches, where college hockey coaches those are the jobs that seem to be pretty shelf stable, right, guys? If you do well there, you've got a pretty good place where you can probably count on being there for a long time, and the money it's not NHL money, but the money has gotten better. I'm curious from your perspective with the coaching market, how the college hockey job security, those type of things, how much that might play into when you get a new name coming up. Obviously the hot one right now that everyone is in all the storylines is David Carl, right? But like how that kind of comes into play where, hey, if you win at the college level, if you win there, you've got a pretty good security. You're not going to be recycled in 2.5 years.
Right. Well, and that also, college football as well. So, the thing about college is you have a lot different responsibilities and you have to do a lot of different things, especially with the transfer portal now. So, in college, 90% of your job is recruiting, right? I mean, you've got to get the good players before you can win. And so you're battling it out. Whereas, and that wears on a lot of guys. And so, some love it, some don't, some have their, top assistant who's their top recruiter. So, and I happen to know, I don't represent David. I happen to know him, and again, yeah, he's perfectly content for right now he's 34 years old, right? He's not in a hurry and so on. So yeah, I mean, and Pandolfo at BU and, I know Jay from my BU days as well. Sure. But, you got to recruit, right? You have to deal with people who are transferring, you have to deal with all these restrictions on what you can and can't do. So it's a different job. I mean, certainly there's coaching and, you're coaching up younger players as well, right? I mean, you're dealing with, although in hockey, not a lot of people arrive on campus now at 20 instead of 18, but nonetheless, you're still dealing, for the most part, with younger kids as well. So it's a different set. And so, yes, there is more stability. You do well at one spot, you can stay there forever. I mean, Coach Parker was at BU for 40-odd years, right? I mean, I'm sure, if David and Jay wanted to stay at BU and Denver, they probably could stay there for, as long as they pretty much wanted. And so it's not so much that they wouldn't, but again, you have to be able to know that it's a whole different world when you're doing those things. And, the older, I mean, it's kind of like me when I'm recruiting football players, right? I'm now going to be 54 in July, right? The college players I'm recruiting are still going to be 22 years old, and they're still going to be 22 years old when I'm 64. And so, you have to understand that that's going to be part of it. And so a lot of guys, both on the college football side and on the hockey side, would rather be in pro where, first of all, yes, the money is more and it may have a little bit of a shorter lifespan, but you're also, you're home a little bit more, although, in college hockey, you're in football, you're home a little bit more, but in college hockey, you're home, more probably in college hockey than you are the pros because you have less games. But again, there still is recruiting and so on, but you're only recruiting like 5 to 10 players a year. But in football, I know it's a huge thing where, again, between the recruiting trips, because, just a position coach himself is recruiting 20 guys, right? The head coach has to recruit all 40 guys that they're talking to and so on and so forth. So, there's none of that obviously at the pro level. And so, but, since we're talking about mostly about hockey, yes, there are guys who will stay longer, but I think at the end of the day, being in the NHL, let's say, as a first-time NHL head coach, you get $1.2 million. That could be 3x your college salary, give or take. So even if you stay, 3 years, it's really like 9 years of staying in college.
So Ian, money. To bring us home, one question I wanted to kind of wrap us up with here is you've had one of the most unique career journeys I think I've ever heard, and I'm hoping everybody finds it just as fascinating, the way you just laid it out for us at the beginning here. And 5 years ago, you made this jump over to say, we're going to revolutionize, the support for NHL coaches and kind of bring that different culture here. What's next? What do your next 5 years look like? What are you going to try and what are you going to shake up next, or is it going to be continuing to expand kind of where you're going in hockey?
I don't know. I've kind of always failed upwards, so I'm sure something will find me. But look, I mean, right now, there's still coaches out there who don't have representation in hockey, and I would love to see them. And look, it's not even from a selfish point of view. I mean, there's 3 or 4 other people, out there who are doing this, on a regular basis. By all means, hire one of them if you feel they're the right person. I'm not saying that we need to represent everybody, but, you don't get the dollars you don't ask for, right? So if you have someone who's there who can help you understand the marketplace and is willing to push for you, I'd like to see more expansion in that. So for me personally, of course, I would love to continue to expand our hockey side. I'm perfectly content. I've made it now since 1995 in the football business. I'm sure that will continue as well. And, the data scientists, they've taught me as much as I've helped them, over these last few years. So certainly I'm happy with that as well. But, at least, as it relates to hockey, I would like to see coaches, and we've come a long way. So when Mike Valley left doing the goalie coaching, part of it is of course, again, he's just so smart and he has all these other business ideas. And, even what they get paid today, he still would be better off financially speaking doing what he's currently doing in terms of all these great business ideas. But it was much easier for him to walk away because what goalie coaches were getting paid, even 6 and 7 years ago, what you would think for an NHL level coach, you would have been like, really? And again, it's real money. It's more than the average person in the real world. But again, we're talking about the sports world where, salaries are paid and what they are. You would have thought to yourself, I can't believe a goalie coach makes that little, actually. And so, obviously I have a penchant for goalies, but, again, we've got Donnie Granato, we've got Jay Leach, we've got Mike Haviland, Derek King, Tony Granato. I mean, Dave Alexander's the goalie coach on the Blues. So, and we have some AHL level head coaches as well. And, for them, a $5,000 raise is a big difference given their pay scale. So, I'd like to see that happen more often because in football, it's the most natural thing. And football staffs, remember, are huge. You have 22 coaches per staff times 40 now Division I schools and then 32 NFL teams. So you're talking about thousands and thousands of coaches who all have an agent, who have all had their agent negotiate for them. And generally speaking, that helps because you have, like I said, such information asymmetry that you don't want a coach doing their own thing. Just like I wouldn't try and coach a football team, a coach wouldn't try and do their negotiations. So, in terms of some great new area that I'm going to shake up, like I said, I've always seemed to fail upwards, so I'm sure something will find me. Maybe I'll go into podcasting. No, just kidding. But yeah, short of that, just keep doing what I've been doing for 29 years in football. But, again, hopefully hockey continues to grow as well.
I got to say, I am disappointed that nowhere in that was learning R. So,
all right. So we can wrap up on this discussion. So I knew Apple Basic. No, and it really wasn't anything against R or either way, but I knew Apple Basic. I learned Pascal as my independent study in high school. Like I said, big computer nerd. Went to college, and by then I had been programming in databases actually, because as you know. You may know because I'm old, relational databases had just really come to the forefront, like DBase4 and Paradox and so on, and they had their own scripting languages. And so since I understood database structure, I learned to program in those, and those were some of my summer jobs, was actually being a programmer in DBase4 and in Paradox. Then I got to college and they made me learn COBOL, and I'm like, wait, this is like 20 steps back over DBase4 and Paradox. And they're like, yeah, but everything runs on COBOL and we haven't changed it yet, so learn COBOL. And so when it came time, 5-ish years ago to pick what I was going to do for analytics, as you know, Python looks more languagey. I'm not going to say, it's perfect, and it isn't, but it looked more languagey. So I thought my basis that I had already of knowledge from learning BASIC and Pascal, which are languagey languages, and more rather than using symbols and symbology, I figured I would adapt easier to Python than to R.
That's fair. As someone who had no data science background whatsoever and learned from YouTube videos just the way you were describing earlier, R was very easy to pick up. And so, that's how I ended up where I am. And now I'm not going backwards from there. But we just got to drag Sean onto the train to at least pick one.
Soon enough. That's going to be. I need a summer project, so we'll go somewhere on that. So
I can recommend a few YouTubers, and we have our, again, that we're well versed in our collective in terms of people who use R and Python. But here, now that they have Shiny for Python, yeah, now it doesn't. Right now, I don't need R.
That's fair. Well. We'll still see until Python's matplotlib and Seaborn and all that catches up to ggplot. I have no reason to go backwards over there. But
no, I mean that's fair. But Shiny was a big ad.
Yeah,
I will tell you.
No, Shiny's as good as it gets.
Yeah. So funny enough, our last creator meetup was the company for Shiny. For Python, they wanted it pushed out. So they had 30 of our creators meet up, and we did a whole 2-day, there were live streams, there were videos recorded, and we did a hackathon all based around Shiny for Python.
I love it. Well, Ian, I just want to thank you for taking the time to, one, nerd out with us, two, share your backstory, and kind of three, shed some additional light on kind of what's going on with coaching representation and NHL ops representation. So can't thank you enough for taking the time to join us, and hopefully won't be a stranger, and we'll be having you back on in no time to learn about what your next thing is that you failed upwards into, right? So
yeah, for sure. No, it's my pleasure to be on anytime you guys want. I'm always available. As you can tell, I'm very wordy, so you don't have to worry about writing up too many questions. I'll wind up doing most of the talking.
I love it. Well, folks, that's Ian Greengross. Again, thank you so much for taking the time to join us, and look forward to having Ian back on in the near future.
Thanks, guys.